Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 53 with Shannon Appelcline, A Brief History of Traveler.
Greetings once again, collected hordes of internet listeners and viewers. I am historian Ben Riggs. Uh, with me is Shannon Appelcline, TTRPG historian extraordinaire. Is it fair to call you the first of us, or at least of our generation of historians?
I think the original edition of Designers and Dragons came out the year before Playing at the World.
And if not, the blog had been going before then, right?
That's right. I did start writing for RPGNet in 2005, I think, maybe 2006.
Yeah, and again, it's not like a contest or anything. I just like coming up with names for people. Um, I always call John Peterson the Arthucidides, and I can call you the first of our generation. It sounds good. Um, although that was 20 years ago.
I'm sure it couldn't have been 20 years ago, just a couple years ago.
Oh God, we're gonna die. We're gonna die, Shannon. Um,
Oh, yeah, not
oh,
today.
not today. And we have you on to talk the history beat in general, but in specific, what is your new book that you have that came out from Mongoose in the fall?
That would be This is Free Trader Beowulf, which is over my shoulder there. Uh, and it is a system history of Traveler. So it's the first book that I've done like that where I just looked at a single game system and covered it all the way from its genesis, its first publication in 1977, all the way up to I missed just short of Traveler being sold to Mongoose, which happened in 2024, about 2 months after we published.
Wow. So, when you say system history, what do you mean specifically by that?
So, I I have my books categorized in three different farms. The first ones I did, which were Designers and Dragons, they were company histories. Each one was a little article that I wrote over the course of months and years about a company. Sometimes a couple of companies sharing the same name. The second histories I did were product histories. Those were originally for D&D Classics, which is now DM's Guild. And each of those I looked at an individual product and said, hey, what's the history involved with, against the Giants or whatever. And so this is Free Trader Beowulf. Instead, I looked at the game system Traveler and the World Charted Space. They kind of have some weird interactions since there have been Charted Space games that are not using the Traveler system, and there have been Traveler games that don't use Charted Space. But kind of, I looked at both of those. I said, what's the history of the game? How did it appear? And what happened with everyone uh, at a certain level who's ever published it. And so it talks about GDW, who were the first publisher, talks about all of the little licensed publishers, some of whom were big names in themselves afterwards, FASA in particular, who got so big with BattleTech. They started out with little traveler floor plans that were done on the dining room table of the principals there. And then it went up through Imperium Publishing, one of Ken Whitman's many companies that went under very quickly, but tried to do Traveler after GDW, and through a whole bunch of small press that were publishing when Traveler was mostly dead as a game system, and instead it was GURPS Traveler, and then to Mongoose in the modern day. So I think it was 14 chapters. So I had one big chapter on fandom too, which was pretty cool because Traveler had one of the most impressive fandoms around.
And obviously, you're focusing on the system of the game itself in that history.
The system was the main through line. Like I
Okay.
said, sometimes the setting too, because GURPS Traveler didn't use the Traveler system. Arguably, Traveler the New Era, which was the third edition, didn't because it used the Twilight 2000 system instead.
What about travel? So, I guess let's begin with a simpler question for the audience, because maybe there's 12-year-olds listening. What the heck is Traveler?
All right, so Traveler is a science fiction role-playing game. We could talk some about the origins if you want to have a lot of different ones. there were a couple beforehand. Arguably Metamorphosis Alpha, which I'm sometimes a little reluctant to say was the first science fiction role-playing game because it was kind of more science fantasy in the same category as Gamma World, even though it
Oh,
was
then
set on a
we got
different.
to pause there then, because this is like so on Tuesday, 2 days before this. So in my audience, I assume will hear it a week before they hear this conversation. We had John Peterson on
Yeah.
to talk about the first role playing game, and let me tell you, I'm gonna find the bloodiest red meat title I can find for that. Something like you'll never guess what the first role playing game really was, and it's not what you think. And I'm gonna get some picture of myself slapping my face in shock and horror. See if I can get John Peterson to do the same face. He won't, I know, but I'll try. Um, but with that conversation so recently in mind, so again, I think if you went to the internet would say Metamorphosis Alpha is the first tabletop sci-fi role-playing game because you're Jim Ward, you're on a generation ship, and you're essentially exploring the dungeon that is this generation ship, but you're still on a ship and there's no magic, right? There's just high tech. There's a
Yeah.
really weird, gnarly system, but it's certainly you would argue that it's too science fantasy to qualify as the first science fiction role playing game.
I'd argue there's a question. You're totally right on that description. It was obviously published first, but the question is, where does fantasy and science fantasy actually hit science fiction? Um, you said it was on a generation ship. How important is that to the gameplay? And then you said it's about exploring the dungeons of the ship,
Yeah.
which I think is very accurate, but that certainly says fantasy to me. So, no, I don't want to take anything away from Jim Ward, but
We can take
was it
things away from Jim.
fiction?
I do not mind taking things away from Jim Ward, even though he's regrettably passed. But sorry, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So, you know, was that or was Ken St. Andre's Starfaring, which I think was the next one, or do you have to even go more forward into something like Traveler before you really get hard science fiction? And Traveler wasn't really hard science fiction; it was Golden Age science fiction, Asimov, Heinlein, all of that good stuff. But you know, they're all fuzzy lines. I hate it in history when someone asks me, "What was the first?" such and such. I was just writing about Critical Role the other day, and the inevitable question up there comes up, what was the first game that was broadcast? And, I came up with a probable answer that it was a Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil that was put up on one of the Cthulhu sites from 2009, maybe. I
Wow,
forget my years. But, first is just a terrible question. And it's because it's always fuzzy.
John, when we were talking, uh, said, he said you can't trace D&D in a genealogical line. The early tabletop role-playing game was a movement, and there were factors that contributed to the rise of D&D. And I'm like, oh, that's so beautiful and so uh, carefully and hesitantly put in a world where again everyone just wants a screen cap of a shocked looking host next to a title that's dripping blood.
I think we all read our I think we all read our history books in high school, junior high, whenever we were reading them, and we saw the facts which were incontrovertible, and we didn't understand at the time that those were just someone's assessments, analysis, even opinions in some cases, even though the history books are supposed to be facts. And I suspect when we started writing history, most of us said, "Wow, this is all really, really fuzzy."
I mean, it certainly does cross my mind that it seems unlikely that a lot of our books will be revisited and rewritten by a new generation. I could be wrong. Um, But like, every generation's going to have its Gettysburg book, right? Like some historian is going to come along and kind of write the Gettysburg of this generation. Like I want to say in the 50s it was James McPherson, Battle Cry of Freedom, and then '80s up to now. Probably I'm going to say Shelby Foote for Gettysburg. Um, but I just can't imagine someone's going to come along and remake uh, Designers and Dragons. That someone is going to go and do such an incredibly broad history of these game companies. But I think the history of those game companies is going to become increasingly relevant and increasingly interesting to people as time goes on, not less so. Um, which does put us in a really weird spot. Um, we're kind of the historians getting the stuff from the creation of the hobby uh, as quick as we can as the last few original lights are going out. Um, I don't know where I'm going with this. I think it was with the the awkward weight of the histories that we write. Perhaps that's where I was going. Um,
Yeah, you work with actual live
Humans.
interviews with people a lot more. Yeah, humans a lot more than I do. I depend a lot more on the primary sources. But after I get those sources, I often go to the humans and say, I could not figure out what was going on here. What was the decision? As you say, we're losing that bit by bit, and so we're desperately trying to get everything we can down while we can.
Well, and I
Um,
just I just don't think I'm ever going to get access to like the Wizards of the Coast email server. Um, I do have some very kind former Wizards of the Coast employees that kept pretty good notes and had day planners for decades. Uh, so I certainly get to cross-reference things against matters such as that. Um,
gold.
Pardon?
That's gold.
Yeah,
Not
I
just
mean,
depending on their memories now.
yeah. Uh, sorry, now we've dipped down into methodology from. So anyway,
Yeah.
I think the
Anyway,
question was, what's Traveler?
to answer your question, there were a couple of science fiction games out. None of them were huge successes. And then Traveler came out in 1977 from Mark Miller and Game Designers Workshop. And as I said, it was based fairly heavily on Golden Age science fiction. Mark Miller has a great story that he likes to tell where he was at university for his first year there, where he had to take a long train ride to get back to where he was actually living. And there was a bodega right by where his train was that had boxes full of stripped magazines, cover off. Presumably the covers were returned. They told him that they hadn't sold, but apparently very, very extensive. And so Mark says that he would grab one of these magazines, which were all Golden Age science fiction magazines. I don't know if they were analog Asimovs or the one on the generation before him, but whatever the ones were in the 50s, 40s, where things like Foundation and the other greats were coming out. And he'd read it through on his trip home, maybe more than one trip, and then he'd throw it away, of course, because what value does that have? And so he says, via that process, over his year that he was spending at that particular university, he read through pretty much the entire Golden Age science fiction production. And then he did a game based on it, and that's Traveler.
Wow.
So there's a few other things that you could say about Traveler. It's got a heavy military science fiction vibe to it because Mark was in the military. Frank Chadwick, another one of the principals of GDW, was in the military, and it kind of came out of a wargaming organization. And Traveler existed at GDW for about 20 years, and then it started going to other publishers when GDW closed up house.
So what's your history with the game?
Uh, One of the most amazing Christmas presents I ever got is my history with the game. One of my stepfather's aunts sent me a copy of the Traveler Starter Set, which I still have over on a shelf there, though the box is gone because it had become so crushed. Um, and I say it was an amazing Christmas present because she knew I liked role-playing games, but the fact that she could know that, she could translate it to an actual product, she could send it, it was one I didn't have, and it was one that was amazing. It was all really cool. And Traveler, one of the really interesting things about it is that Mark, when he was designing the system, he said, how could we make a game that someone could play solo? Because, we're talking decades before the internet, maybe even before ARPANET. And so no one was in communication with anyone. If you wanted to get together and find other people who were interested in role playing, you know, maybe you went to a convention, but that probably required you to go out to Lake Geneva or something. So it was really a much more important question at the time. How could you actually play this on your own if you couldn't find a group? And so he made what he calls solo games. One of them's character creation. Famously, the original Traveler lets your character die during character creation. And in recent generations, people laugh at this like it's something funny, but it was the whole intent. On the one hand, Mark wanted to have these systems that you could run again and again and actually have fun with. And, maybe you have some fun with it if it's just the system, but you have even more fun if your cool character that you created could die at the end. But also he wanted to have a risk reward system. And so if you do the risk of, continuing to advance through dangerous careers, through careers as your character ages and stuff, there needed to be a risk to go through rewards of additional skills and stuff that you could go. So that was one of them. There were systems to generate planets. There were systems to generate, entire universes. There were increasingly complex systems to build starships. And I point all this out because I had a table in my childhood bedroom, and the Traveler books were always often spread out over that table. And I had photocopies of all of these charts, and I was, making various systems and, diagramming out very complex ships with the more complex system from Highguard and all stuff like that. So I loved that. I think I maybe unsuccessfully ran some games in high school or so. Just I think my group wasn't into that. I, successfully ran D&D, Stormbringer, other fun stuff like that. But I can't really remember a Traveler game going very far, though I found like old character sheets and stuff in my boxes, so there must have been a little bit. Um, I finally got to run a full Traveler campaign I was very happy with. Maybe in the odd aughts using Mongos's system, maybe the tens, one or the other. And so I ran a 20 episode campaign set in the Spinward Marches, had a lot of fun in it, really figured out it's a very well detailed, complex universe. And so one of my goals was figuring out how can I, really start explaining the stuff to the players, introduce bit by bit, drip by drip how it works. And so I have a whole AP of that, which is at RPGNet, and I've put it all together and I'm trying to get one of the magazines to publish it. And then you know, Matthew Sprague over at Mongoose 3 or 4 years ago said, "Hey, I've been talking to Mark. He's looking at the legacy of the game. Would you like to put a history of it together?" And I should say, I'd previously worked with Matthew because he was the one that did the original one book edition of Designers and Dragons. And I'd previously worked with Mark because when I was running that campaign, I was doing a set of reviews for RPGNet that said, hey, this is literature that's associated with Traveler, either a precursor or a licensed product. And Mark put all of those together in that book. And so, strong history of Traveler, really loved it. And I spent about a year and a half putting together the book, not full time or anything close to it. It was kind of my tertiary project with some of the other things I was doing, but it really brought me back into the universe and the game system, but especially the universe in a way that just made me feel joyfully nostalgic. And I think that came across in the book, which has gotten some pretty good response.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Traveler guy. Like I can't say I've read a single Traveler product or uh played in a Traveler game, but I went to Humble Bundle and I dutifully downloaded your book. And I read the first couple pages and your writing is both engaging and fast moving, and the quality of the product itself is pretty astounding. Like it looks much more like an RPG core book to me than it does like any other history, except maybe Art and Arcana and the Stu Horvath one that the name is
Alien
escaping.
something
Yeah,
something.
yeah, because but you're really responding to let's make the history books look as beautiful as the role-playing game books
Well,
movement. So
that
I
that
was very
was
impressed.
that was all mongoose there. I was thrilled when I started seeing the pages come in from them.
I mean, it must have been thrilling. Um, so this is fascinating to me. So this I don't want to say it was work for hire, but it sounds like it was work for hire that turned into a passion project.
It wasn't work for hire in that technically I own it.
Okay.
So I make sure with my history work I refuse to sell the rights to it, and so that's always the first question. And it's mainly because I want to make sure they stay in print. And so now that Mongoose uh, owns Traveler, they're going to probably keep the history in print. But it it was a passion project from the start. Uh, I spent 2021, I think it was, working on another passion project, which was a book on the elves for Rune Quest, which is something that I had actually run a few iterations for different game systems before. And then I put that together when Chaosium asked me to. And I got to the end of the year, and that was another tertiary project that I was doing along with new company histories for designers and dragons and an update of all of my D&D product histories for a set of books we're calling Origins. And so I was doing that elf book, and I don't think I've ever been as overworked in a year. I was doing, technical writing for clients a few days a week, and then I was doing these three different projects, two history projects and the one role-playing project. And so I got done with that year, and I said, well, thank goodness I had that elf book sent off to Chaosium. Now I can just get back to these other two projects that, had been long brewing. And then Matthew mailed me in December or January, somewhere around there, just when I was getting the Elf book out, and he said, "Hey, do you want to write this history of Traveler?" And I thought, no way, absolutely no way. I'm going crazy. And I mailed it back and I said, "I'd love to. Yes, that would be terrific." And so that was because I suspected how much fun it would be. Um, and then I spent like 6 months going through magazines before I put down a single word. Uh, I was able to get access to a lot of fanzines that I had when I wrote the original Designers and Dragons. And so I went through month by month, not reading them wholly, but going through all the news, all of the, stuff that's relevant for the histories. And that was just thrilling seeing it all unfold, and particularly seeing how some of the fandoms unfold. They have a fandom called HIWIG, the History of the Imperial Working Group, which kind of took over some of the history aspects from GDW when the second edition of Traveler came out. And they had probably hundreds of issues of, several different fanzines. And just reading through them, I was transported back to my adolescence when I was making those, ships and universes on my table in my bedroom. It was wonderful.
Um, it's remarkable to me that uh, Traveler was almost a solo game for you until the 21st century.
Hmm.
Um, do you think science fiction is a more challenging genre to portray at the table, especially like broad golden age sci-fi?
It's a good question. And I'd be curious on your take on it too. I have definitely heard people say that. Um, I've never felt it, but I've heard people say it, so I think it must be true. Um, there certainly is something to say that if you came into role playing, you probably came in through D&D. Um, and if you came in through D&T, then you had these tropes of what play is kind of impressed upon you from the first day, characters, classes, dungeons, dragons, MacGuffin quests, all that stuff. And you don't necessarily have that. Um, One of the things that I think some of the people working on Traveler said was that a challenge is that Traveler is so wide open. Um, you do, there's a curious amount of stuff in Traveler that kind of focuses on criminality, rogues, you know, that And it turns out that a lot of that was because people were looking and they were saying, what are the tropes of D&D play? How do we have those in science fiction play? But the thing is about science fiction in particular, and this should be true in D&D, fantasy, any other, but it's become more true in science fiction, is that you really can do anything. And so, like, some of the original playtest games of Traveler involved bodyguarding people who were hunting animals on alien planets. And, that's, I guess I can see some D&D tropes there. Um, but still, it's somewhat far removed. And there's a whole one of the original adventures for Traveler was called Safari Ship, and it adapted some of those ideas. But you can have political games very easily. You can have MacGuffin quests like a classic fantasy game. You can have exploration. Um, One of the coolest ones that Mongoose did was this exploration of a big area in known charted space called the Great Rift, where, you know, there aren't a lot of stars. It's a big gap, and they just kind of had this big ship drifting down it. And, what you find when you explore. So if there's a challenge, it might be that you get into a science fiction game and you say, what do we do? We could do anything.
And I think you're putting your finger on it. I think that one of the uh, killer features of D&D from 1974 onward is the dungeon. Um,
Mm.
that you have a bounded geographical area, and the dungeon master only needs to be responsible for that bounded geographical area. And it is much easier to run a dungeon than a council of war, say, for a dungeon master. Um, and because science fiction is so open, I think that presents exactly the challenge of, um, well, as you just said, if you can do anything, what are you going to do? And holy crap, if you're the DM, um, I ran I think, very successful year-long One Ring campaign.
Mhm.
I loved it. I think my players loved it. And I had zero hesitation in jumping into the deep end on Tolkien. Um, but I have, if I were to raise my camera, you would see a bunch of the Dune role-playing game books up here, and I'm like, I don't know, Dune, like, it's probably if you looked at the memes that my players share on our group chat, it would be Baron Harkonnen has arrived at the Met Gala. It's just going to be Dune meme after Dune meme after Dune meme. But I am hesitant and fearful of opening those books and trying to do Dune, because it is so big. Um, and have you read Stars Without Number?
I've skipped it.
Okay, so of course, Stars Without Number is famous for its uh, sector creation rules. It gives you tropes. You roll up the tropes. You establish biosphere, temperature, and all population, all this stuff, tech level, and boom, you have a sector to explore. And I have been for the past couple of weeks playing with that and just making my own sector, and that has felt incredibly enjoyable as a form of solo role playing. But
Yeah.
also I do kind of feel like, okay, once I make my own sector, I feel like I'd be comfortable running my players through it. And again, Kevin Crawford is very open about his huge debt to Traveler. Um, he steals a number of system concepts from Traveler. Traveler does 2d6 skills, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he stole that right from Traveler. Hit points are the same as from Traveler. And I had could you tell us about Traveler hit points?
As I rec I believe the current edition, original edition, that they were based on the stats. It's been a while since I played, but I think maybe you lost stats as you went down. Stats, one of the fun things about Travelers, the original stats were hexadecimal.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so that allows you to go from 0 to F15. 2d6 is a good range for that because you get 2d6 and then you get a little bit of variation of that. But They allow you to create something called the UPP, the University Personality Profile. And so you define a character as 747 ACE dash 3. Maybe they don't have the dash for UPPs. Yeah, I think they don't. Um, and I believe that those dropped in at least some of the variations. You ask what are hit points like in Traveler, and I have to think Classic Traveler, Mega Traveler, Traveler of the New Era, or
Oh boy.
Mongoose Traveler. Because there's at least those four major different game systems, even not including GURPS, are T20, are probably some ones I'm forgetting.
Well, then I retract the question. Um, but in any event, I was just working up to. I'm working on my own sector. I'm going to try it in Stars Without Number. Um, and again, I came into my own in the '90s. Uh, and Travelers seemed to be an eclipse. Maybe you would disagree with that. But in the past 10 years, holy cow, the things that have come out that claim Traveler in their DNA are remarkable. Probably, I would assume Mothership is the first one that comes to mind, where like Mothership is like, yeah, we're directly inspired by Traveler, and what a great game that is. So you mentioned Rune Quest, and
Yeah.
Rune Quest is a game I keep trying to get into and never quite managing to do it. Um, because man, the guys at Chaosium, again, they're Rune Quest guys first. They love Rune Quest so much. I picked up some books. I played in a game at GaryCon. Um, I played a duck. I was like, okay, if I'm doing Rune Quest, I'm gonna play a duck. And it certainly was a fun and enjoyable experience. Um, but given that you were writing a history of the elves in Rune Quest, I take it is a game that appeals to you and you've really enjoyed.
Yeah, well, I
Oh, yeah, and you worked for
you
Chaosium for a while, didn't you?
that's right. So I used to have for about 2.5 years, I was lucky enough to have an office pretty much kitty corner from Greg Stafford's. Which also meant that 5 o'clock would come along. The Smoke and Pot song would come on a local a station, and the pot would start wafting straight between his office and the warehouse, which was right on the other side. I would start getting hungry, and I'd say, "Okay, it's time to go home." Um, but yeah, we were not doing RuneQuest at the time. The RuneQuest rights were still stuck with Avalon Hill at the time. Greg was putting out Gloranthan material, but it was his unfinished publications, which were kind of his deep lore on Glorantha. Um, what I suspect you and most people bounce off of on Glorantha is the deep lore, let alone the deep lore. And it's because it's a really richly defined setting, and it's a really uniquely defined setting too, and it's kind of changed over time too. So, and Traveler has some of those same issues. The charted space setting is really deep. It's probably what I love most about Traveler, that there's this whole universe of different alien races and history that goes back thousands of years, and something that I really love in a role-playing game, that I love in any type of narrative, that Traveler really did well was the fact that there were these deep mysteries in the setting. Who were the ancients was the first one, and they eventually answered that. And there was, what is the Empress Wave, and any number of other ones that, they introduced these clues and they showed things that were happening. And they said, there's this mystery, and maybe we'll eventually tell you what it is. And in the case of a lot of the ones before they went out of business, maybe you'll never know, except, what some people have said after the fact. But I think RuneQuest and Traveler both have that in common, and that may well be why they're two of my couple of favorite games.
Hmm.
That really deep setting, and until you're on the inside of it, you're on the outside of it. And
Legend of the Five Rings is always my example for that. That like I got into Legend of the Five Rings with the first edition. It felt like this amazing mythological storybook. I'm interviewing John Wick tomorrow. I'm really excited about it. Um, and the for those of you who don't know, it's Tolkien smashed up with Japanese myth and Japanese history with some China thrown into. Um, and there's different warring clans, and because it was the 90s, of course you got splat books for every clan with cool stuff and the lore, and those that first core book and those splat books are just so good. They put you in a place and they put you in a time, the perfect time in the story. One of the clans is about to betray the emperor, and like for the first, that's the meta plot for the first couple of years, and it was fantastic. Um, I have, I don't think it has successfully translated itself to another generation. I just don't think, and again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are thousands of under 30 people playing Legend of the Five Rings, but I'm really not seeing it. Um, and again, maybe you just needed to be in that cohort that came up with the game and experienced the meta plot firsthand. Um,
Well, I might have said the same about Traveler and about Rune Quest both before the last 10 years. You said earlier you thought Traveler was maybe not in ascendance in the 90s, and that was very much the case. Um, they were both dead systems until 10 or 15 years ago. Mongoose picked up Traveler, I think, in 2008, and their first edition was well received, and their second edition's been very well received, I think, because that's where they really upped their graphics.
wow,
And RuneQuest Adventures in Glorantha, which is the newest edition of that, it came out, I don't know,
2015, I
8
think.
years ago, maybe somewhere around there.
Pre-pandemic, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it was pre-pandemic. I remember just as the pandemic was starting, listening to some of their interviews while hiking around on empty shores here.
So where would you recommend a player start with? So obviously everyone needs to start with your history book on Traveler, but after they've consumed that media, where do you think a player should start with Traveler?
Mongoose has a really beautiful set of Mongoose Second Edition is what they call it, books. Um, Let's see, what do I actually have on my shelf? I mean, clearly there's a core rule book. Um, and my favorite rule books after the core rule books are the Aliens of Charted Space books, because I think they kind of reveal the richness of the setting. There's also Martin Doherty is one of the authors who has really kind of shown himself to be a very expert, knowledgeable on Traveler in the last couple of decades. And I believe he has a book on the Third Imperium, which is the main human setting there. That would probably also be a good starting point. You know, it's I don't know how much of the current stuff I've read because, for me it's like, oh, well, clearly the Digest Group publications that were printed in the 90s and now go for 100 or $150 each, but that's probably not the right answer for the new player.
They don't have PDFs of those?
There are not because of a very funny story that's in this is Free Trader Beowulf, which is DGP was this, small amateur group. Most role-playing companies fit somewhere near that category. Um, they were producing very professional material. They were one of the companies in the 90s that had kind of the uneasy position where it felt like the licensee, was putting out better material than the licensor. Um, and eventually, uh, the main person in the company, the principal of it, got a wake-up call that he was totally neglecting his family, putting out the books and running the company, and so he shut it down. And after he shut it down, an internet fan found him and said, "Hey, let me buy all of this material for you." He actually just came to buy a couple of books he didn't have, but he ended up buying the entirety of DGP's Traveler production.
Huh?
And then he tried to offer it back to some of the publishers at absolutely outrageous rates, just crazy rates that did not reflect its value at all. I mean, IP for a role-playing game, unless it's D&D, it's not going to have a huge lot of value, but you know, he thought it did.
Hmm.
And so all of this DGP stuff has been in this what's called by fans a semi-canon space for now, and that everyone's afraid to use it. There's you can use IP to a certain extent, but you get into derivative copyright and the question of what you can do and not what you can't do, and no one wants to try and license from them um, because he doesn't understand the realities of role playing. But it's such good material that no one wants to purposefully contradict and decanonize it. So, uh, TLDR, no, it's not available as PDFs. It's awful, awful tragedy.
Intellectual property is a weird thing. Um, Man, have you looked at the Rune Quest starter set?
Yeah, it's a nice little set.
Yeah, I thought it looks beautiful. Um, but I don't know that again, I've yet to exactly figure out exactly what it is about Glorantha that drives people crazy and makes them love it so much. But I thought it might be in the starter set, and I'm like, I don't know if it's there. Somebody was like, get 6 seasons in starter, so I have that. But I just haven't had the time to pick it up yet. But there are people that are like, no, 6 seasons in starter, if I'm even pronouncing that right, that's the way to go. I don't suppose you've seen that.
Yeah, yeah, they are both right over there on the shelf. So, um, Glorantha, part of the issue that people have with it is it's this huge, big setting. And I think the reason people love it is the mythology
Mm.
that Greg came up with this uh, story of how the world had been created, how chaos invaded it, how the world was destroyed by chaos, how it was reborn, how the people who rebirthed it then tried to create a new god that never works out well, and so
Mm.
chaos came back, and now it's on the verge of the Hero Wars, which is going to be another big battle between the Lunar Empire and the Sartorites, and so it's a big, big story, and that mythology people is what people love. And so when Rick Meintz and Jeff Richard put out the new edition of Rune Quest, they said we're going to do something different. We're going to concentrate on a very small geographical area called Dragon Pass, Sartors and Dragon Pass. And we're going to, tell our stories there. We're going to, have the characters born there, all of that. And so they are really trying. And the starter set is, I think, an example of that because it really focuses tight on Sartor of how'd you get a new player in. So if you'd asked me instead, how'd you get a new player into Glorantha, I think RuneQuest Star Set is an excellent
Mm.
answer. And that's because that's what they're doing. Now, the question is, once you get into this really tight area, do you still have that magnificent mythological overview that attracted people? And I don't know what the answer is on that. But 6 seasons in Sartor, what it does is it says, okay, your characters are kids. They haven't been initiated yet. That's how you find your god and become a lay member later in initiate of the god. Um, and so, here's kind of them growing up. Here is, their initiation. This is how they kind of decide who they are. And so, what he tried to do, I think, is really make it very visceral, this idea of gods and initiation, and these things that aren't necessarily usual for even a fantasy role-playing game. And I agree, 6 seasons in Starter, super successful. There are a couple of books that follow it up, but
Mm.
read through it, see what you like. It is one of the few books for Glorantha that I've read front to back in the last few years, and I went afterwards and I gave it enough of a raving review that I think it's used in their marketing material now,
That's
which I
amazing.
am I am thrilled with that I could help out with a book and help bring attention to a book that is so awesome.
Well, I remember I read the first 5 pages, and I felt transported in some way. It did
Hmm.
feel like uh, role-playing game books are obviously technical writing at their core. But they're technical writing that has to inspire you in some way, and it happened with that. And I was like, oh, maybe they're finally getting it. And then my son was like, I need to poop. So okay, down goes the book. We're going to the bathroom and we're dealing with this poop situation instead. He's 4, I should add. It's not like he's 14 and being like, Dad, that'd be pretty weird. But
Yeah.
uh
I mean, we should say 6 seasons. Sorry, it's a third party book. It's It was put out through Johnstown Compendium, which is their community content program. Though Drew, the author, is now doing some writing for some of their main books because the Gayazi people said, "Wow, this is amazing."
And I want to say he's based in Japan.
Yep.
Huh. Um, and being a parent has been absolutely amazing, but one of the downsides is that when the kid calls, it's amazing how you can just drop what you're doing and you don't know when you're going to get back to it. Um,
Yeah.
you ever read Hellboy?
Yeah.
I started reading Hellboy a week ago, and I was expecting this kind of cheesy. Um, I was expecting Army of Darkness was what I was expecting from Hellboy, and I'm like, oh, this is really creepy. Like, there's
Yeah,
just
it's got the
creepy art.
creepy, pulpy, beautiful Magnolia art in the original at least.
Yeah. So it's much better than I was expecting, but so far it seems like reliably I will get through the part of the story where it's like laying out the mystery or the horror situation, and then again something comes up and it's like I go away for a day and I come back and and I try and pick up again and again it's good. It pulls me in. But my current life dream is sitting down and reading through an entire Hellboy story uninterrupted. Just get,
I'm certain you will be able to do that in 4 to 10 years.
yeah, and it keeps getting better. I keep getting time back. Um, but well, that has really given me some things to think about, Shannon. So, do you talk to John Peterson much?
I don't.
Huh. Okay, so I'm gonna have to have you two on.
I
Um,
think so. I
because
kind of feel like we're the three that are, doing more than just one-off history at the moment.
I suppose, I certainly feel like the junior of those three. Um, but talking to John is really enjoyable. Talking to you is really enjoyable. And I'm beginning to wonder to the degree to which my podcast might be find people that I think are interesting and put them on a podcast for an hour together. Because I did that with Mike Merles and Kelsey Dion, and it went really, really well. So maybe that's where this is going. Because I don't want to be. I know that the algorithm rewards shocked face. The D&D scandal just got worse, you know, and people will click on it even like it doesn't matter. Your content doesn't need to be that. You just need that image. Um, but I'm like, there's a point at which that will stop working and people will violently rebel against your manipulation of them. So I'm trying to keep this not that. And to those of you who are listening who may have made content like that, that's fine. I'm not judging anybody. I'm just saying it's not. I don't want that to be this. So yeah, I'm gonna have to get you
Uh,
and John on for a conversation because that would just be a
yeah,
fascinating hour.
you can say John and Shannon fight over D&D history, and we can both.
There we go. D&D historians draw blood. Who is the most historical? Uh, but yeah, it is funny now that you mention it. Like I get like Witwer, his name is on Art and
Yeah,
Arcana and Hero's Feast, which I guess that's not history, that's a cookbook. Um, he had that Drist book, right?
I'm sure what Driss book.
There was a like history of Dristu Urden that came out, kind of in the style of Art and Arcana, I want to say. Let me see. Um, Michael Whitwer, Drist.
I mean,
Dungeons
this
and
back
Dragons: The
here,
Legend of Dristu Urden. There we go.
yeah, this back here is my shelf of main history books. So he also did Empire of Imagination.
Yeah, which is got to be his
So
true entry point, right? Like he's the guy who wrote the Gary Gygax biography.
yeah,
But he is Lucy and I am Charlie Brown consistently for like 2 or 3 years. Whitwer has been like, "Hey, let's get together." I'm like, "Okay." I'll email him being like, "Hey, I'm going to be in Chicago on these dates." Crickets, 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 crickets. "Hey, I'm going to be in Chicago on these dates. You free?" Crickets, crickets, crickets. I'm like, "It's week of. I'll just I don't want to wait, so I'm going to cancel on in advance on Whitwer. So I'm sure you're busy, so let's not get together." And he's like, "Oh." I was just trying to figure out a place to meet. And, I was like, hey, let me have you on the podcast sometime. Love to have you on. Oh, yeah, great idea. And I'm like, well, I'm free at these times. Crickets, 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 crickets. You know,
Sounds like he is busy.
I mean, my understanding, he has more kids than I do, so there is that. Um, but I would love to have him on and join us, but there's a reason that it may not happen. Um, but so other than Free Trader Beowulf, what work of yours would you point people towards? I would point them towards Designers and Dragons because, my God, that's gotten me through some rough times. But what would you recommend of your work?
I think Designers and Dragons. This is Free Trader Beowulf is literally my favorite thing that I've ever written. But Designers and Dragons, it's the, wide look at the industry from 1974 to when I wrote it, 2013, I think. Um, but the but there is that the print books are all out of print, all of our nice offset print books. You still can get it as a nice hardcover pod from Drive-Through RPG. And when I say Designers and Dragons, when we say that's 4 volumes, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and odd odds. But the other but is that it goes up to 2013, so it's out of date right now. So, I say pick that up maybe, but pick it up as PDFs because today, literally today, like 2 hours ago, I finished my first draft of the kind of supplement to that, which is called The Lost Histories. So it's going to have 74 new histories, going up into the tens and going up to this year. Um, and then we're going to put those out probably as PDFs or pods next year for everyone who has the current books. And then I'm going to get started on the third edition. And the third edition, I'm going to resource and probably rewrite all the originals, and we're going to put it into topical books or alphabetical books. I don't know. So Designers and Dragons is in a little bit of a funny place, but you can get all of the PDFs from Drive-Through RPG, and they're hopefully still very enjoyable reads, even if they're a little bit out of date.
Does your Lost Histories include Pelgrane Press?
Pelgrane Press is in the original.
Oh,
So
really?
I think
But only up through 2013?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's in the odd odds though. It should be in the odd odds. Yeah, I remember writing about Jack Vance and other related things there.
Yeah, if there was you can write like 100,000 words and uh, time is infinite and money is irrelevant, I'd be like, all right, I'm writing a history of Pelgrane Press. Here we go. There's like 5,000 people that are going to really eat this up, and that's unfair. They probably have a bigger uh,
Yeah.
player base than that. Um,
So
but
the Lost Histories, which I got the first draft of the last history done today, 74 histories, 398,000 words. Um, 3 books probably, but it could be 4 books. Lost History is one, which covers 70s and 80s stuff I didn't hit before. There's
Jesus.
some miniatures companies in there, companies like the Armory, 90s and Odd Odds, which cover things I didn't cover in there before, including the whole OSR movement, and then the tens, which is longer than any of the other books.
You said 398,000 words?
Yeah.
So for listeners, I just got to put that in perspective a little bit here. So, uh, fiction writers, like a respectable fiction writer, will do 1,000 words a day. Like,
Five
you
years of work. 5 years of work.
God. So, and again, like if you're like 1,000 words a day for a good fiction writer, hopefully that's an hour of writing. Like you can have a real writing career and another job writing 1,000 words a day. Nonfiction, I find, is half the pace. Like if I
Mhm.
get 500 words an hour done, I'm like that seems to be going pretty well. Is that about your pace?
Well, I usually have been writing since I started the Lost
Hmm.
Histories project. I've been trying to write about one history a month. So
Oh
it's
God.
been 61 months I've done it, and I told you I have 74 new, so I went a little bit more than that. So those tend to run maybe 6 to 10,000 words for what I write in the month. So what I do is I spend half the month researching usually, and then I spend half of it writing.
That
So that
which
sounds
does make me feel better because I've very much been in research mode on my second book, um, and not writing as much, and I feel a little behind. But then I talk to other nonfiction writers, and it's like I'll do years of research, and then I write it all in 6 months, and I'm like, okay, that makes me feel better. Um, but still,
Yeah,
you
like
said
I
this is
said, for This Is Free Trader Beowulf, I spent 6 months researching, and then I was like, oh God, I have to start writing this. I told them it would be done by the end of the year. It was not done by the end of the year. Um, but in that one, I think I spent 6 months researching, and then I spent another 15 months writing while also continuing to research.
398,000 words, though, right?
Yeah, that's for the Lost Histories.
It's
I have
Peterson. Go ahead, sorry.
I do have the other projects that I've been kind of doing simultaneously. But by topic switching like that, I feel like I can do more work. Okay, I'm burned out. I can't possibly listen to another podcast or read another interview, but I can, look a little bit at this one particular book that I'm writing about for Origins. Or, I can look at some more magazines for Traveler or something.
So Peterson the other day was like, playing at the world was 400,000 words in its first edition. That's about the length of War and Peace. And again, I'm just astounded at 398,000 words, because I realize the effort that represents, and how, hey, Tolstoy could basically make most of that up. Yeah, it was historical fiction, but still, like, he could make Napoleon say whatever the fudge he wanted to in that book. And everything you write and everything I write needs to be tied to gosh darn reality. 398,000 words. I'm gonna weep. I'm so impressed.
The way
So,
I've always done my writing across this and a lot of other projects is almost all of them, I figure out a little discrete unit. So with Designers and Dragons, it's the company history. And so a company history, my shortest, I think, is 1,000 words. Um, my longest is, I think, about 40,000. I think that's what the TSR one came out to, somewhere in there, 30 or 40,000. But that little discrete unit, that's pretty easy to write. And especially if I say, hey, I'm going to write that this month. It's just when you do something like that and you accumulate them over 61 months, those one little units start to add up. So that's how I do most of my writing. I write little units. I'm writing a book on Michael Moorcock's fiction, which I've been working on for like 10 or 15 years, but I do it one book at a time.
okay, well, if you're ever back on the mainland for a convention, I would love to buy you a beverage. Uh, Again, listeners, please go and purchase something of Shannon's. I two thumbs and 10 toes up to Designers and Dragons. Like, it got me through the pandemic. I just had that on my phone, and I would read that instead of any of the other depressing things going on in the world today. And it was a transporting event. So thank you very much. Shannon, I will shout out. Hey, if you didn't know, we have a Patreon. Shock of Shocks podcast has Patreon. Um, for $3, you get access to our Discord. I post historical documents on the Discord. You get extra episodes. You get Sandy Peterson talking to Ken Hite about Call of Cthulhu. Gen Con owner Peter Adkison talking to Gen Con historian Matt Shoemaker. Me and Scott Bruner talking to Zeb Cook in Hugh Hefner's suite at the Grand Geneva. I'm going to be posting up there. I did a talk at a bookstore here in Wisconsin last week where I read a chapter from my upcoming book. Upcoming, don't start pre-ordering anything here. But the next book I'm writing, I read about 3,000 words of it aloud at a bookstore, and I recorded it. So that's going to be going up there. So if you want extra episodes and more fun stuff, please come and subscribe to our Patreon. And Shannon, thank you so much for the time. Sorry we went a few minutes over. And enjoy the rest of your lovely day in Hawaii.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's been great talking.